Hi, I'm Lewis. I'm one of the naturalists out here at Jester Park, and today we're exploring a wonderful habitat found in Iowa called a woodland. Why is it called a woodland? Well, first of all, it's covered with trees. Trees, wood, so it's a land covered with wood, so woodland. And in Iowa, there's basically two types of trees, and the trees are what dominates a woodland habitat. And we can classify the trees into two basic groups. There are trees called conifer trees, or as we like to call them, pine trees or evergreens. And the other type of tree that you could group trees in a woodland in Iowa is called deciduous trees. And I'm standing on a great trail here at Jester Park that you can see both types of trees. On this side we have conifer trees, and you can kind of pan up and look at these trees, and you can notice that they are covered with needles, and they are also green all year round. And that's another reason why people like to call them evergreens. But the technical term of this type of tree are conifer trees. And another reason we call them conifer trees because of their seed production, which comes in the form of a cone. And that's kind of where the conifer or cone name comes from. So these are pine cones, and they produce their seed from a cone. So that's why we give them the conifer name. Another characteristic of conifers, they do not have leaves, they have needles. And now these needles are brown because the branch broke off and the needles have died. But when it's a living branch, these needles will stay green year-round, and they don't drop their needles completely. They always retain some of their needles year-round. So conifer trees produce a cone and have needles and stay green year-round. The other type of trees that we have in Iowa we could classify as what we call deciduous trees. And the difference between a deciduous tree and a conifer tree is a deciduous tree does not have needles but has leaves. So I'll walk over here to this type of deciduous tree. Now it's early spring here in Iowa, so these leaves are just beginning to kind of regrow or redevelop. But if you kind of look behind me through the forest, it looks like a lot of the trees behind me do not have any leaves. That's because deciduous trees will drop their leaves in the fall. So these leaves are just now becoming redeveloped because it's spring. So deciduous trees drop their leaves every fall. They don't stay green year-round. Another difference between deciduous and conifers, deciduous trees do not make a cone. They actually will make a seed, or kind of like a fruit, and they drop that seed to the ground where another tree will grow. So two types of trees in Iowa. Conifer trees have a cone and needles. Deciduous trees have leaves that they will shed and produce a seed. But we've been focusing a lot on what types of living trees we have here. But what happens when a tree dies? Does a tree, when it's dead, have any value? Well, we know that living trees are of great value to us. They produce oxygen, which many of us know. They grow a lot of the food we eat. They can make medicine that we need. They cool our earth and shade our houses, and they produce wood that we can build things out of. But when a tree dies, it's not doing any of those things any longer. So does it have any value? And the answer is yes. In fact, you could argue that dead trees could be as valuable as a living tree, especially ecologically. And to help explain that, we'll walk over here to this dead tree right behind me. This tree right here is no longer alive. The branches and the leaves are all gone. It's no longer producing oxygen. It's no longer producing any kind of food for us to eat, but it still has great ecological value. And as a conservationist, we understand that we need to leave these trees in our woodlands. These types of trees provide great shelter for a whole variety of wildlife that lives here at Jester Park, beginning with the little bitty ones. I see tiny little holes and cracks all over this tree, and that tells me that insects have been moving into this tree, chewing and burrowing their way inside this dead tree. And after these insects begin to infiltrate or move into this tree, then we're going to have animals like woodpeckers that are going to come and they're going to peck at this tree to remove all those insects, and it becomes a restaurant for woodpeckers and other wildlife. The hole that the woodpecker creates is then going to become an area where maybe a small raccoon can begin to even dig further into the tree and move inside. As the inside of this tree becomes hollow and soft, they can dig cavities in, and it can provide a home for raccoons and possums and all sorts of larger wildlife. So a standing dead tree still has great ecological importance in a woodland. But if you follow me down here, it gets even more interesting. As the tree begins to drop its leaves, the bark begins to shed off of the tree, and you can begin to see all this organic material or once living parts of the tree that are now laying on the ground. But the story's not over yet. See, as these things hit the ground, we start to see more holes and more insects and earthworms and things beginning to move in and under and around this type of material. And I see fungus growing all over. This one right here has white fungus and some cup fungus. And what we're looking at is the beginning of the decomposition process. Now that this material is on the ground, a whole host of organisms begin to kind of slowly chew this up and grind it up and slowly begin to recycle it. And you look under a piece of this bark and you can see that it's actually looking more like sawdust. And if I take my hand and I kind of work it like an insect's mouth part, I begin to grind this stuff up, and amazingly it begins to look more and more like soil. And that is the kind of the end, or part of the end of the life cycle, I guess, of the tree. Is over time this material gets ground up back and made back into soil. And that's kind of the recycling process. But it really doesn't end there, because a seed from this living tree above me could fall right here on the ground into the soil that this dead tree became, and the whole life cycle begins again. And that's what's nurturing all these plants. It's soil from past plants that turned back into soil. So even a tree has a life cycle, from a living tree to a dead standing tree to falling on the ground and beginning to decompose and eventually turning back into soil where new trees can begin to grow. So woodlands are amazing ecosystems, and I hope you guys get out and explore one of our woodlands and in one of our Polk County Conservation Parks. It's a great time to get out. There's wildflowers blooming and mushrooms to find, and everything's kind of just coming back to life in this forest, and it's a great time to get out and explore. So we hope you guys get out and explore a woodland this spring, and thanks for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.